Hello and welcome to Transformations, People of God, Esther. This week we'll be talking about courage. What does it mean to have courage? What does it mean to experience other emotions like fear and doubt and worry when it comes to getting in touch with our courage? We hear about the story of Esther. She was made queen. At first, things are good in the palace for a little while. But then Esther finds out that her uncle, Mordecai, is outside of the gates. He's dressed in a sackcloth, he's covered in ashes, he's weeping and wailing. And she sends a servant down to figure out what the problem is. Mordecai tells the servant of evil Haman's plot to destroy the Jews, her people. But Mordecai has a plan to get them all out of this trouble. At first, Mordecai is very forceful in his command to Esther. He says that she should go unto the king and to tell him of her Jewish identity and to make a request that he lift the decree that Jews should be killed. Mordecai knows that this is going to put Esther in a difficult spot, yet he expects her to rise to the occasion. After a timid first response, she's fearful and worried and wondering if she's going to live through it. But eventually she steps up and carries out a plan to save her people. Now, you and me, we're not likely expected to face that situation that Esther did. Likely, our lives won't be put on the line to save our communities. However, it could be, as in her circumstance, that we might have to do something that frightens us. Or maybe it's displaying strength in the face of grief or pain. And so here is what we need to know about courage. Courage may not be our first response to trouble. For Esther, after hearing Mordecai's instruction to go before the king, Esther sends word back. She says, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever man or woman shall come unto the king in the inner court, who is not called, there is law that he should be put to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, and that they may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king in 30 days. So she says, "Look, Mordecai, I have not been called, and I know the penalty of going to the king when not called is death." In other words, she's saying, you're putting my life at stake, dude. And I can't even imagine that struggle in Esther's heart as she is thinking about what she needs to do to step up and save her people, and considering the fact that she might be put to death. But she rises, and she decides that it's worth it. It's worth it. To save the lives of the Jewish community, she decides that it's worth taking the risk. The second thing you need to know about courage is that God puts you in the right place at the right time. This might be the most famous verse from the book of Esther. "And who know whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" That means, who knows if you're in this exact moment for God's purpose. God truly placed Esther in the right place at the right time. Initially, she did not know how it was going to play out. But when she did her part and courageously went to see the king, God put into motion God's plan for the Jews to be spared from destruction. In the same way, you and I might not see how God's agenda is unfolding in our lives. Yet we can ask God for courage for what he calls us to do. If our goal is to live out of our best selves that God created us to be, God can do amazing things through us. The third thing you need to know about courage is that God gives us courage when we ask him. Before Esther approached the king, she sent specific instructions to Mordecai. She said, "Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Susa and fast. Don't eat or drink 3 days or nights. And my maidens will do likewise." When she was fasting, she was praying. She was asking for God's help and wisdom and strength. Any courage that we can generate just from ourselves is likely to fade fast because, let's face it, it's normal to have doubts and concerns and for our self-esteem to be challenged. But we can know that there is an unlimited supply of courage that comes from God. If we want to be brave, it's going to come when we connect with our deep selves that are connected to God, when we spend time in prayer, when we spend time really contemplating how God shows up in our lives. And just like Esther, she asked other people to pray with her, to support her, and to pray to God for strength with her. We can ask others to be part of that, and that helps us feel supported. Another thing about courage that you need to know is that doing what you're called to do come before your own thoughts and fears. So it was a really powerful line that Esther said. So I'll go unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. She knew that she was taking on a huge risk, but she knew what she was called to do was even more powerful than her fears were about it. Often I can think myself, like, what if I do this? What will other people think? How will this affect me or my family? Instead, we can be confident that God has us and has good plans for us, even when it doesn't seem like it makes sense at the time. Also, let's remember about courage that God uses our courage to affect the lives of others. You might not know who is positively affected by you taking a stand. Perhaps it is by you being true to yourself and getting in touch with who God made you to be, that people can see that and be like, wow, God is doing amazing things in them, and maybe they can do the same for themselves. When we, through God's power, have the courage to do what is right, other people notice. It could be our family, our church, those around us, and the future generations can notice that beautiful things happen when we can rise to the occasion to do what God has planned for us and be confident that good things will come from that. Another thing we need to know about courage is that courage stays true to its own. Even in the luxury of the palace, Esther never forgot where she came from. She was separated from her people. She was in the palace, they were in the streets, but she still remained a loyal Jew. She never lost faith or her identity as one of God's people. That's something that you and I can remember, is that even when we're in a new situation, we're being challenged in different ways, we can always remember who we really are, and that's one of God's beautiful creations.
The last thing is that courage knows which voices to ignore and which ones to listen to.
If Esther had listened to the inner voices of doubt and fear, she would have never dared to go before King Xerxes. But she had learned long before to challenge those voices that came to her in the moment and discover that small voice that was connected to God. When her life was on the line, Esther chose to trust God and his wisdom and put herself on the line for her people. We can think about this for ourselves. What kind of tough situations are we experiencing right now? The secret to Esther's courage was not her beauty, wisdom, or position, but it was her faith and courage that God was unshakable, unstoppable, and would defend her to the end. If you want to have courage, remember whose child you are. Walk with God. Know that even when you have doubts about yourself, about God's existence, know that there's a small voice inside of you that is connected to God and that knows the truth of who you are and what God has planned for you. Peace, my friends, and I can't wait to talk with you about courage.